Shalom to the elect of Israel, to the hopeful elect of Israel, you Hebrew Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, West Indian, and Haitians. Got to give all praise and honor and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, the Most High, the Heavenly Father. His Hebrew name is Yahweh, not Yahweh, not Jehovah, not God, not Elohim, not Jah, not Yah, not Most High, not Lord, not Ahaya. It's Yahweh. His only begotten Son name in the Hebrew is Yahweh Shai, not Yahshua, not Yeshua, not Jesus Christos, not Jesus Christ, not Serapis Christus, not Yeshaya, not Yehoshua. It's Yahweh Shai. So got to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh. Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rekah, Korash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well, who teach well. And a sincere salutation to all the occupants pushing this truth and believing this truth throughout the four winds of the earth, the entire world, waking up the hopeful elect. And shalom to the Akwaf who are listening and learning, the few sisters who are listening and learning. I'm Isaiah from the GMS Orlando camp, coming at you another lesson in true facts, faith, and edification, another daily edification, Lord's willing, is be edifying. And this is Babylon the Great, and their economy is collapsing. Their monetary system is collapsing, which it's all to bring in the RFID microchip, which is the mark of the beast. But their economy, their world is crumbling right before our eyes. Lord willing, be edifying.
America has dominated global finance since the end of the Second World War, when the current system was built.
Designed to establish the economic foundations of peace on the bedrock of genuine international cooperation.
But the economic disaster caused by the coronavirus pandemic could signal a new chapter in financial history.
And this is for educational purposes only. This is for educational purposes only.
America's leadership called into question.
COVID-19 has shown that America is failing to sort out its own affairs at home, let alone provide global leadership.
$484 billion for loans after the first round of funding ran out.
Another huge spike in unemployment claims.
With a vacuum emerging at the top of the financial order, China is vying to compete for greater control.
This is not a case of China becoming Wall Street overnight. The crisis has provided China with an opportunity to show what it's capable of doing, which, in the long run, will tip the balance of power.
In global finance, America is king. It controls the world's financial plumbing and accounts for almost a quarter of the world economy. The dollar makes up most central bank reserves and is the currency of international trade. 80% of global supply chains use dollars, which gives America significant power.
Whoever controls the flows of money at the end of the day controls a lot of things in the economy and ends up being the puppet master of a lot of things that go on around the world.
China.
And we know who controls the money. We know who controls the laws. This is Job chapter 9, verse 24. It reads, "The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covered the faces of the judges thereof. If not, wherein who is he? So the earth is given into the hand of the wicked." That's who control the money. Let me get one more. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 in verse 8. "Because of unrighteous dealings, injuries, and riches got by deceit, the kingdom is translated from one people to another." So we know who these people are. They faces on the money.
Hopes to correct this imbalance.
There is a growing call from the international community for reforming the global economic governance system, which is a pressing task for us.
It already has the world's second largest economy. Its banks are enormous.
And as the scriptures say, as we know, that the kings of the earth will bring Babylon the Great to his knees. So, hey, if Russia is that Russia joined with China, joined with Russia, Russia will be the new superpower of the world, man. And China, like I always say, China will be the monetary system and Russia will be the military, man. This is Isaiah 47:1. It reads, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground, there is no throne. O daughter of the Chaldeans, thou shalt no more be called tender and delicate." Because as we know, when you read Obadiah 1:7, these nations is going to turn against North America.
The banking sector has been growing fairly steadily for the past 10 years, while in America, bank assets have remained relatively stable. And with European banks' assets falling, Chinese banks now have more assets than those in Europe or America. But most of their business is within China. Chinese banks account for only 7% of cross-border lending. So the bank's vast size hasn't translated into influence within the world's financial system yet.
Its banks are becoming more active overseas. They are lending to companies, in particular Chinese companies that are globalizing. China is also giving its own currency a more prominent role. In commodities market, it has convinced a few companies to use the currency. Rio Tinto, which is one of the largest iron ore miner in the world, issued its first contract in yuan last year.
The COVID-19 pandemic could increase China's financial influence.
China is now sharing its experience with the rest of the world and providing much needed supplies.
30 tons of equipment to Italy, 500,000 surgical masks to Spain.
Following the outbreak in Wuhan, China has positioned itself as a global leader.
See, China will be the new global leader, man. Right? With join with Russia. Now, this is Joel chapter 3 and verse 10. The point being, beat your plowshares and the swords and your pruning hooks and the spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. See, these weak nations, these used to be weak nations. They are not weak anymore, man. Okay? This is Isaiah 14 and verse 10. All they shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vows, and the worms is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. That's total corruption, total corrosion. Tell you that in Jeremiah 5, and like in James chapter 5. Real quick. It said that garments of, let's read it. Jeremiah 5:1. Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your misery that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted. That's total corrosion. Your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you. It shall eat your flesh as it were fire, and ye have heaped treasures together for the last days. So they are becoming weak, and the other nations are becoming strong. And China, join with Russia, they will be the new superpower, man. You heard it just said. Let's run it back.
China has positioned itself as a global leader, containing the outbreak, agreeing to deals to suspend repayment of some of its loans, and charging ahead with vaccine development.
The COVID crisis, at least so far, has cast a negative shadow on the capacity for leadership of America. It did not try or even show interest in marshalling a global response to this crisis.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
This could offer an opportunity for China because it's tried to fill the vacuum that America has left in terms of global leadership.
China's tough response to the crisis and the growing size and depth of its financial markets have helped convince investors it's a safe bet, even as COVID sent other markets crashing. While emerging markets saw the value of bonds plummet earlier this year, China's government bonds remain stable, which is a good gauge of trust in a country's economy.
So China has the second biggest bond market in the world. COVID provided the first tests that this bond market could resist a crisis in a way that typically emerging market bonds don't. It shows investors trust China as an economy that they don't think it's going to collapse overnight.
As well as improving its reputation with international investors, China hopes to increase its hold over how money moves around the world. America has huge influence over the current system, thanks to SWIFT, the world's largest network for transferring money.
And how do America have influence over the nations? Because of the blessing that Esau received. This is Genesis 27 in verse 39. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above, and by thy sword shall thou live. That's their blessing, man, to live by the sword. And who has the biggest military on the planet? Babylon the Great. So they set up their draconian law, their policies, their legislations, their philosophies, their democracy, and they rule the world, man, through the sword. Get down or lay down.
It's a messaging system that allows financial institutions to communicate. It's meant to be geopolitically neutral. But because a majority of SWIFT transactions are in dollars, and these are routed through New York, America has used the system to choke its adversaries.
Right.
Russia feared being excluded after its invasion of Crimea, and some Iranian banks were blocked from using the system in 2018 to enforce US sanctions.
So SWIFT is based in Belgium, so it is supposed to be neutral. However, America has a strong influence over it. America can also threaten SWIFT with sanctions if SWIFT does not do what America wants.
Right.
This is very upsetting for its allies, which would rather the system stays neutral and for the benefit of everyone.
For now, China can't hope to challenge America's dominance of SWIFT. Instead, Chinese companies are targeting a different part of the financial system, the way in which consumers spend their money. Most consumer payments rely on American giants, Visa and MasterCard. But Chinese tech companies have developed a series of apps that disrupt this system.
Wow.
Rather than using bank accounts or credit cards for transactions, consumers load money into digital wallets. Consumers can then do almost anything, from paying parking fines to making investments or ordering taxis, without any of this money flowing through the banks, creating a parallel financial ecosystem.
Wow.
This is potentially very disruptive to the financial system. It changes the way the money moves around the world. It empowers a new set of companies which are so big that even the Chinese government is scared of them.
Last year, Chinese customers made mobile payments worth a total of $49 trillion.
Wow.
And the two main Chinese companies offering this tech, Tencent and Ant Financial, are enormous, with 1 billion users each. COVID-19 may increase their reach.
People are doing more shopping online, trying to stay away from cash, which is seen as a potential contaminant. And this is all to the benefit of electronic payment firms.
Yeah, that RFID microchip, which is the mark of the beast, is here, man. It's here.
Ant Financial and Tencent are already expanding overseas. Ant Financial's app, Alipay, is accepted in 56 countries and regions. And other digital wallet firms are buying into their tech. Alipay's QR format has already been adopted by 6 European mobile wallets.
And you see, man, these people gonna take that RFID microchip. Hey, without a second guess, man. Without a second guess, they're going to take it.
America has reasons to be worried about the Chinese giants. They are getting bigger in the
See, they just showed you what they do. They have council, man. They take council together.
region because they are investing their wallets in Southeast Asia and beyond. And in effect, it creates a system that is not reliant on American companies, American standards, American norms.
But China faces a major obstacle. Much of the world distrusts its intentions.
China denied a cover-up.
Top Chinese officials kept it quiet.
After all, Chinese leaders initially denied and covered up the spread of COVID-19.
There is always a doubt about what is the ultimate objective that China is pursuing in being so collaborative at the present time. It's not always transparent about the truth and what happens in its own country. In a global financial system, you need transparency. You need to know the facts, what's going on, to make sure the system is in good health.
As China's financial sphere of influence grows, it's unclear whether it will complement America's by creating more competition or undermine the existing system.
In the end, what we could see is the fragmentation of the global financial system in an America-dominated sphere and a China-dominated sphere. These two systems don't have to be mutually exclusive. They could actually collaborate with each other. If they do, great. If they don't, then it will be harder to move money around the world. It will be a costlier, a more dangerous financial system, and in the end, most people will lose out.
China may not become the dominant force in global finance anytime soon, but COVID-19 is helping to fast-track its progress. And as the world recovers from the virus and economies begin to open up, China will be well placed to make significant gains.
And that's facts, man. Now I'm going to play this.
The coronavirus pandemic is hitting America hard. Countless Americans are being advised to stay home as much as possible, and governments are telling non-essential businesses to stay closed. But governments themselves are also taking a hit. Much of the economy has either slowed down dramatically or ground to a halt. And with all that lost economic activity come the tax revenues governments depend on to pay for their massive budgets. On April 21st, Senator Mitch McConnell said he would support the idea of letting states declare bankruptcy. Later, he walked back his comments, but the episode resulted in a firestorm of media commentary.
Come on, man. That is completely and utterly irresponsible. This is no time for bankruptcies and wishing bankruptcies.
The most un-American, uncharitable, ugly statement of all times.
Of course, there are reasons to be concerned.
You see this? That's the vision, man. That's the vision. That's Mark 3, man. I gotta read it. Mark chapter 3, verse 23. It reads, "And he said unto them, in parables, and he called them unto him, and said unto them in parables, How can Satan cast out Satan? And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house be divided against itself, which we see all the time, that house cannot stand. And if Satan rise up against himself and be divided, he cannot stand, but have an end." You see, they divided, man. And they've been divided since they came over here and conquered this land from our people, man. They have always been divided, man. They've been fighting amongst each other. World War I, World War II, the Civil Wars. They have been fighting amongst themselves, man.
About states' fiscal health.
I think the big difference between this downturn and what we saw in the Great Recession or the recession of 2001, 2002 is the speed with which it came on and the severity with which it came on. That really makes it unprecedented. From a credit standpoint, states entered this in a stronger position, but they're going to have to use all of the tools that they have available to them to maintain their credit quality through this.
An array of industries have been badly hurt since the coronavirus began to spread. Travel and tourism have tanked, stores are shuttered, and restaurants are relying on takeout and delivery to try to stay afloat. As all that business dries up, so do the sales and tourism taxes that go with it. Some states, such as Washington, Arizona, Nevada, Louisiana, and Tennessee, all rely heavily on sales tax for their revenues. A number of states with high sales taxes collect no state income tax at all. But income taxes are also taking a hit. A staggering 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits. The federal government has also extended the tax deadline from April 15th to July 15th, and many states have adjusted their own deadlines accordingly. That means that for the next 3 months, they will have to do without whatever state income tax revenue would otherwise remain. Meanwhile, states have to keep paying for services. Roads need to be maintained, government workers still need to be paid, and governments are now also saddled with medical and unemployment expenses. There could be more hurt ahead for city and state finances across the U.S. By law, municipalities, such as cities, can declare bankruptcy, but states cannot, and they never could. However, some in the legal world have argued that state bankruptcy should be a viable option, and it's a better alternative to bailouts. University of Pennsylvania law professor David Skeel is one of them. He and fellow UPenn professor Robert Inman co-authored an editorial on May 5th arguing that McConnell was right to say that emergency aid from Congress should not be a bailout for state deficits that have nothing to do with the pandemic. They argued that Congress should act as an insurer of last resort, only hand out aid to states for losses incurred during the pandemic and not for pre-existing problems. Skeel has argued in the past that states in deep financial trouble should be allowed to file for bankruptcy. Inman is skeptical. But it is clear that McConnell is not the only person who has expressed support for the idea.
Isaiah chapter 10, verse 1. But this is what they do to cover themselves, man. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievousness which they have prescribed. You see, this is what they do, man, to cover themselves, man. This is Job 13 and 4. It reads, but ye are forgers of lies, ye are all physicians of no value. They are forgers of lies, man. They are physicians of no value, man. They don't help nobody but themselves, man. They don't care, and they set it up through their laws, man. They make laws to cover their way of life, man. This is Psalms 94 and verse 20. Shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee? No. That's a separation, which frameth mischief by a law. And that's what they do, man. They frame mischief by laws, man. They set up they policies, they legislations, they philosophies, they draconian laws, man, for them.
So legally, why can cities, towns, or school districts declare bankruptcy when states are unable to? Since 1937, the Federal Bankruptcy Code has allowed municipalities to declare bankruptcies. Municipality is a broad term that basically includes all kinds of subdivisions of states, such as towns, cities, and counties, but also school districts and some government organizations within a state that collect revenue but don't cover a geographic area, such as a bridge authority. But the Contracts Clause of the U.S. Constitution prohibits states from impairing the obligation of contracts. Subsequent Supreme Court decisions have generally supported the notion that states cannot refuse to pay their debts.
So in our constitutional system of federalism, there's really only two sovereigns. There's the sovereign United States government, and there's the sovereign state governments. There's no such thing as a sovereign city government. And so the idea is that the United States has been thought not to be allowed to do things that would impair the ability of the states to function as governments. But there's no similar principle that would prevent the federal government from doing things that would impair the ability of cities to function as governments, because cities are not dual sovereigns the way states are.
So for states to even legally allow themselves to declare bankruptcy, Congress would have to pass a law adding language to the Federal Bankruptcy Code that
See? It's about the laws that they set up, man. This Psalm 94 and 12. Blessed is the man whom thou chasteneth, O Yahweh, and teaches him out of thy law. that thou mayest give him rest from the days of adversity until the pit be digged for the wicked. See, it's out of the Lord law, man. But what the scripture say? Isaiah 24 and verse 5 reads, the earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, which I read in Job 9:24, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore have the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men left. And the few men that's going to be left is going to be the elites of the Israelites, man. Okay, the elect. It say what? Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, man. That's going into the wicked, the rulers. 2/3 of Israel, the heathen, going to be burned, and few men left. It's going to be the elect, man, of Israel. And the elect on the left-hand side of the heathens, they got to go into slavery. But it's showing you that what? Because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant.
Implicitly allows states to declare bankruptcy. Then individual states would have to each pass a law that allows them to declare bankruptcy. Finally, the Supreme Court would have to determine that all that legislation does not conflict with the Constitution.
So if a state declared bankruptcy, then necessarily that means that some of their creditors would not get paid in full what the state owes them. And so those creditors would take that case to the Supreme Court and argue that it was unconstitutional for the states to be relieved of the debt to the creditors. So that's how it would get to the Supreme Court. That would be the last step in the process.
So, if it's even possible, it's not a process that would be likely to happen quickly. The question of whether states should be able to file bankruptcy is a thorny one, and there are some critics of the idea that say allowing states to file for bankruptcy would, for example, raise the risk of lending money to states. It could also pit the interests of creditors against the interests of states. But the idea does have support. David Skeel, the University of Pennsylvania law professor, made the case for letting states go bankrupt when the country was in the depths of the recession spurred by the financial crisis of 2008. At the time, several cities and states were in deep financial trouble, which some, such as Skeel, attributed to runaway expenses. Allowing states to file for bankruptcy would save taxpayers a great deal of money, he said. Such laws could be squared with the Constitution and could be structured in a way that ensured bankruptcy courts did not override the state's abilities to pass their own laws. Anyone who proposed, even a decade ago, that a state should be permitted to file for bankruptcy would have been dismissed as crazy, Skeel wrote in 2010. But times have changed.
States always have the ability to pay their debts by raising taxes. There's some views that would say that's not a good thing to do, right? And then states also have the ability to pay their debts by borrowing, but there's often even more consensus that that's not a good thing to do. And a lot of states actually operate under their own state balanced budget amendments, which are in their state constitutions. So states could change those. There's no federal requirement that states balance their budgets, but a lot of states have imposed that requirement on themselves. And so if you think that a state should keep a balanced budget and shouldn't raise taxes, and the state doesn't have enough money to pay all its bills, then bankruptcy starts looking attractive, right? So
and this is all because they have transgressed the Lord laws, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant, man. If they would follow the laws of the Lord, the laws of the land, it wouldn't be like this, man. But they trying to cover themselves. They don't care about the people. They trying to cover themselves. Ecclesiastes 10:2. As the judge of the people is himself, so are his officers. Everyone that's in league with the wicked, with the government, with the system, with the beast system. And what manner of man the ruler of the city is, such are all they that dwell therein. An unwise king destroyeth his people. And that's what's going on, man. They don't care about the people, man. They covering their own self.
I think there's some people who want to take those other two options off the table, and then they say, well, if you're not going to contemplate those other two options of raising taxes or borrowing money, then bankruptcy is the most orderly way to figure out how a state is going to pay pay some bills if it doesn't have enough money to pay all of them. But I think, people on the other side of that partisan divide have not been as opposed to states sometimes raising taxes or sometimes borrowing. And those would be alternative ways of getting the bills paid without really requiring the creditors to take a hit.
But the situation prompts another financial question: whether coronavirus is even putting states in a position where they would need to declare bankruptcy if it was a legal option. And none of the research from the three largest credit rating agencies in the US suggest any states are in danger of defaulting on their debt obligations.
Nearly all of the states are in very strong credit positions, and that's not even something that they need to think about. There certainly would be constitutional issues of the federal government somehow overseeing state finances, but it's not an issue.
In fact, states tend to have pretty high credit ratings.
So 2/3 of our states are in our two top rating categories, and that really reflects the broad range of powers that states have over their finances.
And they say credit, man, credit. They have no real money, man, no real wealth, man.
Equities are rallying on Monday on news that a potential vaccine could be in the works of being developed. Joining me to talk about the market and the latest news is Peter Schiff, CEO of Euro Pacific Capital. Peter, welcome back to the show. It's a pleasure.
Oh, thanks for having me on again.
The S&P 500 is up almost 3.5% on Monday's session following news that Moderna has reported good results of their phase 1 clinical vaccine trial. Peter, this is the most we've seen the S&P rise in almost 6 weeks. So what exactly are investors pricing in right now?
Well, I think that people are looking for a reason to buy. I mean, it's very, unlikely that this particular vaccine is going to work. I mean, who knows? Maybe it will. But there's a lot of success in early trials, and then these things don't pan out. But I think what's really driving the market is the Fed. You had Powell on 60 Minutes last night basically committing to print an unlimited quantity of money and urging Congress to borrow and spend as much money as they want.
And the money is not backed by nothing, man. Nothing.
And that the Fed is standing ready to monetize an infinite amount of government spending. So I think people think that that's good for the market, but it's not. It's a disaster for the economy. It will destroy the value of the dollar. And sure, that means that stocks will go up. But so what? If you're pricing them in worthless currency, in fact, there is a limit to how much money the Fed can print, and that is when it collapses in value. What's the point of printing money that doesn't buy anything? I think we're going to find out pretty soon.
Real soon.
I know you've said before that the Fed really has started making mistakes before the crisis began with lowering rates when they shouldn't have. Now, what really, in your mind, should have been the correct response during this pandemic that Powell should have taken?
Well, had the Fed been doing the right thing all along, the economy would have been able to withstand the pandemic and would have been in a position to allow the government to do the right thing, which is to dramatically reduce government spending. That's what's needed. And to the extent that we need the government, if you believe that we need more government, it needs to be paid for by taxation, not by inflation. But the problem is nobody has any money. Everybody is broke. Everybody is leveraged to the hilt because the Federal Reserve has made one mistake after another to inflate one bubble after another. And this particular bubble was already deflating before the coronavirus pin put a gaping hole in it. And now the air is coming out much faster. And all they can think of is, how can we fill it back up again? How can we reflate a bubble? And it's going to be impossible. I mean, they shouldn't even be attempting to do this, but they are doing it. And I think they're going to destroy the dollar in the process. What people really need to be vaccinated from is the massive inflation that the Fed is going to unleash.
We're going to talk about it.
This is James 5:1. Go to now, ye rich men. Weep and howl for your misery that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted. It say, for your miseries that shall come upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eating. Your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them, because it said, what? Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days, shall be a witness against you, and shall eat your flesh as it were fire. Ye have heaped treasure together for the last days. Hey, they got so much money, it's old and rusting, man. Hey, but it says it's going to be a witness against you. Because what? You have taken You have taken and you have taken, man, by the sword.
Inflation data in a minute, Peter, but just hypothetically, if tomorrow a vaccine were to be delivered and everybody could be declared healthy again, could we still see businesses return to normal right away? Just last week, J.C. Penney, one of the largest retailers in America, filed for bankruptcy, and that's joining a host of other big companies filing for Chapter 11. So is the business landscape changed forever? Have we gone past the point of no return already?
Well, first of all, what we had before COVID-19 was not normal. We had a bubble.
Right.
And if the question is, if we had a vaccine so that people would no longer catch COVID-19, could we go back to that bubble? And the answer is no. I think that bubble has already popped, and I don't think there's any way to reflate it. So I do think that we could have some type of recovery, but we're not going to recover back to the way we were. I mean, we may succeed in temporarily recovering from a depression to a recession, but then the economy is going to roll back over into depression. But what's going to make this depression particularly painful is going to be the rapid escalation in the cost of living. So it's going to be a combination of much higher consumer prices and ultimately long-term interest rates, as well as unemployment and a weak economy. So we haven't experienced anything like this in the United States. They've experienced it in other countries, but we're about to experience it in a big way.
And how is the dollar supposed to respond to unlimited quantitative easing on this scale, Peter? Where can we expect the dollar to be next year?
Well, I think the dollar is headed much lower. Maybe it'll get there in less than a year. There's no way to tell for sure. I mean, the dollar is already defying gravity. It should already be coming down, but it hasn't. But I think once it starts to fall, it's going to implode. And of course, you can't wait for that. In fact, former Fed Vice Chair Alan Blinder was on television today saying that, well, he was concerned about the skyrocketing deficits, but right now he's not seeing any signs in the bond market or the foreign exchange markets that would suggest that it's a problem. And so, it's okay. But, if you wait for a sign in the market, then it's a crisis. I mean, once the dollar crashes and the bond market crashes, and now you get the sign that you've been looking for, that the deficit is a problem, it's too late. You can't wait for a crisis to try to come up with a solution, because by then there is no solution.
Some people have defended the Fed, saying that we're in a period of inflation and that money printing really is essential. And you've countered that argument by saying that the CPI really isn't telling the whole story. So how do you see it? Where is inflation really at right now?
Well, it's at an unprecedented level. I mean, inflation is the expansion of the money supply. That is the definition of inflation. You expand money supply, you inflate money supply. And we've never seen inflation like this. Money supply is growing at the fastest rate in U.S. history. I think year over year, it's up about 25%. Look at the Fed's balance sheet. It's just skyrocketing. And of course, most of that increase in the money supply happened in the last 6 weeks, not in the last 52. And the amount of inflation that the Fed is going to be creating in the weeks and months ahead is actually going to be greater than the amounts that it's already created. This is never a good thing. Inflation is a tax, and it's the most vicious tax because it hits the most vulnerable. It hits the lower class, the working poor, people who have savings. It destroys the value of a lifetime of savings. It destroys the value of the wages and salaries that people earn. We're paying for government through inflation. Literally right now, half of every dollar the government is spending has been borrowed, right? We're borrowing right now as much money as we're collecting in taxes. And soon we'll be borrowing more than we're paying in taxes. But since the Fed is monetizing most of that debt, the American public is going to pay for all that government through inflation rather than through taxation. And believe me, when you pay for government through inflation, it ends up costing a lot more than if you honestly paid for it with legitimate taxes.
So how bad could inflation get? Can we see potentially hyperinflation like we did in the early 80s?
Well, we didn't see hyperinflation in the 80s. I mean, we're going to see inflation much higher than what we saw in the 70s. And of course, the CPI is very different. The one that we have today doesn't measure prices the way it did back then. I mean, if we had a more honest CPI, it would already reveal a price increases that are much higher than what the government has been admitting to. But even based on the way they're measuring them now, we're still going to take out the levels that we saw in the 70s. The question is, will it go from very, very high inflation to hyperinflation. And the jury's still out on that. It is very possible that that's where we end up. But in order to avoid that fate, the Federal Reserve is going to have to do a lot of things that up until now it has resisted doing because of the terrible immediate consequences. What the Fed would have to do to avoid hyperinflation is allow interest rates to rise sharply, even though the economy is in recession. And even though the stock market is tanking, the real estate market is tanking, banks are failing, companies are going bankrupt, and the government is not going to be able to pay its bills. The government won't be able to make interest payments on the national debt. It won't be able to pay Social Security or Medicare. And the Fed is going to have to sit back and allow all this to happen and refuse to bail anybody out because that's the only way to escape hyperinflation.
Proverbs chapter 10, verse 2. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness deliver from death. The Lord will not suffer the soul of the righteous to famish, but he casteth away the substance of the wicked. This is Ezekiel chapter 7, verse 19. They shall cast their silver in the streets, and their gold shall be removed. Their silver and their gold shall not be able to deliver them in the day of wrath, in the day of the wrath of the Lord Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushua. They shall not satisfy their soul, neither fill their bowels, because it is a stumbling block. It is the stumbling block of their iniquity. Because this video about Peter Schiff, it say Feds will wipe out many investors' gold to return as reserve currency, which it ain't gonna happen, man.
Now, I know you've never looked.
In Job 20, the Lord say, hey, right when they think they're gonna fill their belly, when they enterprise, when they think they're gonna establish their enterprise, he's gonna throw a wrench in it, man.
We've been a fan of big government, so all that stuff you just mentioned, Medicare, insurance, should that really be left to the government, or should the private sector be dealing with their own problems right now?
Well, the biggest problem the private sector has is the government, and it's been the government for a long time. I mean, the government got involved in areas of the economy that it never should have been involved in. I mean, constitutionally, it didn't even have the authority to involve itself. But unfortunately, we made that mistake a long time ago, and now we are dealing with the consequences. And politically, it's very dangerous because this most recent crisis, the government is using this as an excuse to really advance their socialist agenda in ways that they couldn't do with climate change. This has been a bigger boogeyman and has been allowing even more government. I mean, even the Republicans have sold what was left of their souls, and they signed on to the CARES Act and the PPP and all these socialist programs, and they've really dramatically increased government. Now you have this HEROES Act that right now the Republicans are claiming they don't want to sign on to. We'll see how long they can resist this. But I think that the problems are going to be blamed on capitalism once again, like they were following the 2008 crisis. This is an entirely government-made problem by the Federal Reserve, by Congress. It's the byproduct of artificially low interest rates, central planning, government regulation, government spending, taxation. But I think the public is ready to blame or throw out capitalism completely and go all in on socialism. And then we're really going to feel the pain.
Now,
Proverbs 23 and 4. Labor not to be rich. Cease from thy own wisdom.
It's been 2 months since you've been on the show last, Peter. During those 2 months, how would you rate our government's performance? If you look around the world, take a look at Sweden, for example. They've abandoned the close-all-shops model, and instead they've allowed businesses to run, but at the expense of public health. Sweden, for example, has one of the highest infection rates per capita in the world. Should we have followed that model?
Well, I don't think statistically the infection rate or the mortality rate is actually that much higher. In fact, when you factor in other variables, you'll find that there are plenty of countries that have had lockdowns that are actually doing worse when it comes to the health impacts. But the jury is still out. I mean, let's see what happens later in the year or next year. I mean, there might be building up immunity there in Sweden. They may have a much better 2021 than a lot of other countries that let their immune systems run down by sheltering at home. But the other factor is the cost. I think Sweden did a real cost-benefit analysis on how to approach this. because there was no one to bail Sweden out. I mean, if Sweden was going to destroy its own economy and spend a bunch of money, it was the Swedes that were going to have to pay for it.
See, this whole thing with these the ones that's rule the earth, man, that's over the earth, the rich. All they care about is money, man. All they care about is money and how to get ahead, man. Proverbs 22:1, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. Verse 2 said, the rich and the poor meet together. The Lord Yahweh is the maker of them all, man. Riches will not profit you, man. Why gain riches and lose your whole soul? That's all these devils talk about is money, man. Money. And what happened to 2/3 of Jake? They follow in the same footsteps, man. Money. It's always about money, man.
They determine what taxes they have. They determine what tax rates they have.
The reason is that despite the trouble they face, states have a pretty high degree of financial flexibility. They tend to have very large tax bases. Of course, that varies depending on the size of the state's population and the health of its economy, but overall, their sheer size gives them a deep well to draw from. They also have two fundamental levers to pull. They can raise taxes and cut spending. States can push some expenses down to local governments. Aside from that, they can also issue debt. State debt issuance activity has been relatively flat over the last decade.
States generally only borrow for capital purposes, to build schools, jails, essential government facilities. They don't really borrow for operations.
And this Haggai 2:8. This is words of Yahweh. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, saith the Lord Yahweh of hosts. So, as you go to Ecclesiastes 11, I think 11:21, it reads, marvel not at the works of sinners, but trust in the Lord Yahweh, and abide in thy labor. What's the labor? Being a messenger of Yahweh B'Shem Yahushua and help sealing the elect. For it is an easy thing in the sight of the Lord Yahweh on the sudden to make a poor man rich. The blessing of the Lord Yahweh is in the reward of the godly, and suddenly he maketh his blessing to flourish. Okay? Listen, man. That's all these devils is consumed with. Why? Because the Lord didn't give them the spirit, man. He gave them the carnal mind. But he gave you Negro, Latino, Native Americans, West Indian Haitians, a spiritual mind, which is a blessing, man.
Overall, they're in a strong position as it relates to debt. We might see some states do deficit financings through this crisis, depending on how bad the revenue situation is. That is atypical for the sector, but is another option for states that also generally have very good market access.
In fact, many states are not out of cash yet. The financial recovery of the last 10 years or so has allowed many states to build up rainy day funds that can be quite large and hold some of them over for a while.
See, this is Ecclesiastes 11:24. Again, say not I have enough and possess many things. And what evil can come to me hereafter? In the day of prosperity, there is a forgetfulness of affliction. And in the day of affliction, there is no remembrance of prosperity. For it is an easy thing unto the Lord Yahweh in the day of death to reward a man according to his ways. The affliction of an hour maketh a man forget pleasure, and in his end his deeds shall be discovered. You see, that money will cause you to be put to death, man. Because all you thinking about is what? You occupied in your craft, man. Getting money. What they say, chasing the bag, man.
In mid-April, the median available state governmental fund was 8% of fiscal 2018 year spending, according to Fitch, one of the three major credit rating agencies.
25 states had reserve levels high enough to cover the largest revenue decline they had had before coronavirus. Now, we, of course, don't expect that states will solely solve their budget problems with reserves, and coronavirus probably has created revenue problems that their reserves can't handle altogether.
You see, it's all about money with these people, man. 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. And 2/3 of Israel, our people, have erred from the faith, following the ways of the heathen, man. Trying to chase the bag, man. Trying to live as the rich do.
We expect to see states take structurally balanced solutions, but they have significant power over their finances.
As of April 30th, credit rating agency Moody's had not downgraded any states because of the coronavirus pandemic. It had, however, lowered outlooks on a few states. A lowered outlook means there could be some downward financial pressure on states, and it also means that they are at a greater risk of a downgrade in the future. In early May, Moody's lowered its outlook on all U.S. states from stable to negative, citing uncertainty as to when life will return to normal across the country. That does not mean states are all going to be downgraded, but it does mean the economic downturn has accelerated, and there are rising state revenue headwinds, especially in sales and income taxes.
That sector outlook really reflects that the operating environment for states is much weaker than it was going into the coronavirus crisis. The employment situation has weakened significantly. Consumer sentiment has weakened significantly. Spending has weakened significantly. And all of that is having negative impacts on state tax revenue. We estimate that in the current fiscal year and the next fiscal year that starts July 1, that state tax revenue will be 15% lower than it was in the last fiscal year.
The three states that have Moody's lowest credit ratings are Illinois, New Jersey, and Connecticut. All three have deep structural financial difficulties that predate the pandemic. Of the three, Illinois is by far in the worst shape.
There are two states in particular, Illinois and New Jersey, that had pre-existing credit conditions coming into the coronavirus crisis. Those two states have very high fixed costs for debt service, pensions, and retiree health care.
Luke chapter 12, verse 15. And he said unto them, take heed and beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things which he possessed. So these devils is occupied in money, man. And they don't even know that their end, they will not be, man. But the Lord got them occupied in this. Everything you hear is about money, man. Budgeting, balancing, checks and balances, man. Credit. That's what the world is built on, man. Corruption. With FRN notes, man. And there's nothing backing this money. There's no gold nor silver, man. And they got Jake following in the same patterns, man. What does it say? Colossians 2:8. Let's read that real quick. Colossians 2:8 reads, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophies and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Hamashiach. You see, they falling after the ways of the world, man. After the rudiments of the world, man. That's why Jeremiah 5:28, what does it say? Let's read that. Jeremiah 5:28. They are waxing fat, they shine. Yeah, they overpass the deeds of the wicked. They judge not the cause of the fatherless, yet they prosper, and the right of the needy do they not judge. Shall I not visit thee for these things, saith the Lord Yahweh? Shall not my soul be avenged on such a nation as this? A wonderful and horrible thing is committed in the land. Talking about you Negro, Latino, Native Americans, West Indian Haitians, man. Falling out the ways of the wicked, man. Because everybody is chasing money, man. Hey, that's why I said And in Isaiah 36:6, it reads this: Lo, thou trusted in the staff of this broken reed on Egypt, whereon if a man lean, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all that trust in him, man. And you trust in this system, you trust in Babylon the Great, you're going to be pierced, man, with that RFID microchip, which is Mark of the Beast, because Esau got your head wrapped around chasing money, man. I'm going to close with this. Isaiah 30:1. Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord Yahweh, that take counsel but not of me, and that cover with a covering but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. That walk to go down into Egypt and have not asked at my mouth. Because if he had asked the Lord's mouth, he would told you don't do it, man. Because he give us our daily bread. To strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh and trust in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion, man. For these things, trusting in Babylon the Great, man, which is Egypt, you're going to be chipped, man. And you're going to take it willingly. You're going to take it willingly. Lord willing is edifying. Gotta give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh. Bahashim Yahweh Shah. Bahashim Rikah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well, who teach well. And a sincere salutation to all the ark and pushing this truth and believing this truth throughout the four winds of the earth, the entire world, waking up the hopeful elect. And shalom to the Akwaf who are listening and learning. The few sisters who are listening and learning. The Lord willing is edifying. Until next time I say shalom. Wa abad babal.